Good. They're talking about that grant program that they have called Defendable Space. And another thing we could call that specifically, that's what I'm going to be talking about. So it's a great opportunity to learn about landscaping gardening techniques you can use in wildfire country to help you create that defensible space. Hey, and when I start my presentation, I just start my first slide. I call it the proud father slide. One of the things is 3 of my children have fought wildland fire for the Department of Natural Resources seasonally. And I also try to recruit new firefighters, Department of Natural Resources. And since a lot of you guys have parents, you might be grandparents, may have young adults, is this is an excellent opportunity for your young adults to earn great money for the summer. Believe it or not, to be a wildland firefighter for the Department of Natural Resources, you don't need any experience. You just need to be 18. They get 40-hour work weeks guaranteed, and they do get a lot of overtime. And so they don't get much of a life, but it's a great way to save money for school or other endeavors. And up on the left there in that picture, that was my oldest son who fought fire for 3 years for us while he was going to college. And now he's fully employed in the world doing computer stuff. On the upper right is my oldest son, who's an engine leader for us right now going to college, and my youngest daughter, who will be entering her 3rd year as a firefighter. And then we kind of make fun of my oldest daughter in the bottom right because she didn't fight wildfire. We tease her because she ran away and joined the Navy and did spend 4 years in the Navy in San Diego. So just to let you guys know, firefighting is a great seasonal job for your young adults to bank some money for school or other endeavors. So the next thing is, the goal of what I'm hoping to share with you guys today there is basically when something bad happens to you, is because of the action you took, your recovery is going back to normal because of those actions you've taken. And the actions we're going to be talking about today is creating that landscape, a defendable space. So when fire does impact your property, because it will, your recovery back will be more quicker than if you had taken no actions. A couple objectives I'm hoping to cover today is for you to know how your landscape, you can create a landscape that's more resistant to ignition. You can recognize how your home might ignite from a wildfire, know some steps you can do to reduce your home starting from an ember, and know some qualities of plants or desirable to have around your home, in your landscape, in your garden, to create that defensible space. This next picture here is a fire we had in Spokane County in 2016 called the Wildfire Fire. The house is still standing. And so you can see damage. He had taken some of these steps, some of these techniques, creating this defensible space, but he did have damage. He did have some loss. And this is his sighting. It was vinyl and it took damage. But I like to tell people his recovery back to normal was very quick. That day we lost 13 homes. Those people took over a year to get back to his home. The insurance company bought those 13 homes. With this homeowner, the insurance company paid $30,000 to reside his house. This homeowner never left his house during all that construction of his home. So his recovery back to normal after this disaster was very, very quick because of the purposeful action he took to decrease his home being burned or damaged in the wildfire. Was it a perfect answer? No. He did have damage, but he didn't lose his structure. One of the things I always like to ask people, if we're an audience that asks you to raise your hand, is the leading cause of wildfire in what we call the Northeast region, which is more of the Spokane area, the northeast part of Washington. And what surprises most people when they ask in person, a lot of people say children, say smoking, they say arson. Actually, the leading cause of wildfire is people outdoor burning, people cleaning up their property, people creating defensible space. So usually, if you're a landowner, you burn outdoors, actually, you're the leading cause of wildfire. So I just want to put that in perspective, is that we're actually usually the leading cause, not children, not smokers, it's us. If you're curious about acres burned in this area, talk about lightning has been traditionally burning some of the most acres, and that's because lightning fires often start on very dry days with a storm, so we get a lot of that wind going with them to get those fires going, get them very, very large. Right there, lightning. A couple things I want to highlight this year. The pollution, you guys, very close to Spokane. We did, in this state of Washington, have a very bad day this year. And that was August 18th up in Spokane County with the Gray and Oregon fire. The weather on that day, this is in Spokane Air Report, was hot, 86 to 90 degrees. But the firefighter, that's actually not too bad. But what couple things that were significant in weather that day was our humidity, very, very low. And what that means from a fire perspective is a single spark with that low humidity could start a fire. Now, to add to that spark that could start a fire, we also had high winds predicted. And we actually had sustained winds of 20 to 25 miles an hour with gusts up to 37. And that is what helped cause these fires to grow so rapidly. The Gray Fire, which was near Medical Lake, started about 12:30. It burned over 10,000 acres. We lost 240 homes, over 300 some structures total. We did have a civilian fatality, unfortunately. The flip side is hundreds of homes survived and did not burn during that fire. Later that same afternoon, about 4:15, the Oregon Road Fire started. It also burned over 10,000 acres. We lost over 300 structures as well. And we also did have civilian fatality there as well. And again, hundreds of homes did survive that fire as well. And so these were catastrophic fires. They were highly punctured by the wind. And most of the structural losses actually happened in that first 12-hour period. Over 90% of those structures, that initial fire spread. So there's actually no time often for people doing anything. This is the time to do the planning now for fire season. And so one of the terms we use when we're creating this defensible space, I like to use the term firescaping. So we want to firescape our landscape. And if you're a gardener, if you do anything out there, we have a lot of what we call scapings that you may do. And what firescaping is actually strategic, intentional choices you make as you look at your garden to mitigate the risk of wildfire. And we do a lot of other scapings besides firescaping, or you may do. Some people like to do scaping for bees, making bee gardens. It could be making a butterfly garden. It could make a garden of shade beds. You could have a multi-seasonal flowering garden. And one type of scaping that we do at my house is we do food. We plant those tomatoes. We plant those onions. That is part of your landscape. For us, that's part of our landscape. So food production is part of our scaping techniques. And the nice thing about firescaping, you can actually combine many of these other different techniques into firescaping and meet your other goals and values. And that goes to your property goals. Before I have people talk about, well, what should I plant? What kind of firescaping to do? And this is just good gardening technique no matter what is my property goals. If wildfire is truly your #1 priority, the techniques to create defendable space is easy. You create a parking lot. It won't burn. Okay, granted, I've never had anyone want this. We all have other things that we want from our property, from our landscape. You may want wildlife. You may want butterflies. You can want flowers. All of us have other different values we have for the property besides protection from wildfire. But listing these out will help you make the right decision when you create this defensible space around your structure. Now, anytime we're planting a garden, exercise, we got to do some prioritization, okay? So we're gonna do a little exercise. If you want, you can follow along. And what I want you to do is get a piece of paper and draw your house in the center of it like this. I'm a forester, so I put a north arrow on it to show what direction the north is. And what I want you to do, and what we'll do for this house in this exercise, I'm going to circle all the areas that I consider as heavy fuels. You can use your own definition where your heaviest fuels are, but we're going to circle those areas. In this picture, the heavy fuels are circled here in orange. Okay, because heavy fuels burn hot in a wildfire. The other thing that causes fires to spread quickly is what we call the topography or the slope. So I don't have topography line, but we're going to circle the areas where we have slope. And that is going to be on the south side of this structure. They actually have slope because they have a great view. So they have that slope, so they have that great view of the valley. The last thing is weather. And one of the things that make a fire go fast is oxygen, which gets there by wind. So we're going to circle here where the summer afternoon winds are. And since this is Spokane County, it may be different for you. And I'm talking about those August afternoon winds. And that's when we get the fastest fire spread in the afternoons. Here in Spokane, our summer afternoon winds comes out of the southwest typically. So now that I've done this exercise, the more circles I have overlapping, the more the fire is going to be with big flames. And this is where I want my priority for my actions to take first. So the first priority area is going to be that southwest part of my house. Then I'm going to that south side of the house with the slope and heavy fuels. I'm going to move up to my east side. The least priority area for me is the north side of my house because I got the least amount of fuels there and I don't have slope. So this kind of helps us set priority. Where do I begin first? Where do I put my most money in to take steps on creating this defensible space around my home? Now with defensible space, we have zones. And each zone, we have different steps we do to reduce the risk of our home being lost in a wildfire and damage. We have zone 1, we call the immediate zone. That's your house plus the first 5 feet. We also call it the Be Ember Aware zone. Zone 2, that's typically your yard and garden. We'd like to see this extending out to 30 feet around all sides of your house. Generally, we maintain this well. We call it the lean, clean, and green. And a lot of us will have over 30 feet of yard and garden on some sides of our house. Zone 3, which I won't be covering today, is what we call the unimproved property. That's the forest area, the sage, the shrubs, the area we don't maintain on a regular basis. So I'm going to take us briefly back to middle school and talk about some basic things that we might have learned in middle school. And that is what makes fire burn. There are 3 things that cause fire to burn: oxygen, heat, and a fuel source. And a lot of times in a wildfire, actually, what causes the fire spread is that heat source that starts new fires is actually tiny little pieces of what we call embers, burning peculiar in the sky. That's that heat source that's carried and lands somewhere around your home, lands on a fuel bed and starts something around your home on fire. So one of the things is, and still we're going to stay here in 8th grade, we talk about how heat transfers. So there's a couple of ways heat transfers ignite. One, we call it conduction. That's molecule-to-molecule transfer heat. Well, like when flames touches your marshmallow goes in flames. The other way heat will transfer that could ignite something around your structure is what we call radiant heat. That's the heat we feel from that campfire. That's the heat we may feel from the sun that gets things warm and can also start things on fire. The last way heat transfers is conduction heat. Heat rises, and the heat rising is what brings those embers in the sky. One of the things that most people think start a wildfire is this: big flames. Okay, in reality, this is not how most of them start. We think this because this is what we see. These are the pictures we see, these are the videos we see, this is what we see on the news: big flames burning a house down. The reality is, it's not these big flames. It's those embers coming from those fires, those big flames landing around your house. The research supports over half the homes are lost from the ember shower and not from the big flames. This is one of those things we focus on, is preventing embers from starting things around the fire when we create this defensible space. This photo is an example of a home lost in a wildfire. Now the question is, how did that home burn? Did flames come up and touch the fire? One of the things the research found out for this home is this home was actually started fire from the embers. We notice the damaged or scorched trees are near the home. Those trees there on the left were scorched by the heat from the structure burning out versus heat coming in the structure, which shows us the structure was ignited not from flames, but from an ember shower. The research scientists who did a lot of study that changed how we thought about home ignition, how your home ignites from the fire, is a gentleman named Jack Cohen, a Forest Service research scientist out of Missoula. And I want to share a very short video that he produced about this.
When I show this picture to people, they're absolutely amazed that this can occur. first of all, we have the sense
Yes, we
that
do.
wildfire, high intensity wildfire, like depicted in this particular picture, absolutely engulfs and explodes houses into flames. And so when I show this, and by the way, let me just say that this high intensity fire at its closest point is about 45 feet from this house. And let me also say that the photographer in this picture was feeling a considerable exposure to the flame. They were beginning to feel the pain that is accompanied by the exposure that produces injury. But that says nothing about what's going on with this house. So let's take a look and see what the house looks like after the fire. So the crown fire has spread through and the house is still here. And the house is still there not because fire suppression, fire protection actions were taken to keep that house from burning down. This house actually did not ignite from that fire. So where's the disconnect in all of this? Well, the disconnect is between what we feel as a person and what it takes to ignite this structure from flames. What we feel is pain and injury from exposures to heat that is considerably less than what it takes to actually even char wood. Let me give you an example. The exposure that will produce a second-degree burn on my exposed skin in 5 seconds takes over 27 minutes to ignite the wood. What that means is that I can get very burned from a fire and the house isn't even beginning to char. So what does that mean in terms of our perspective? Well, what that means is that we start paying attention to these big flames, which then produces our perception that, my goodness, how in the world can this house still be here with all that flame in the picture? And the reason is because the requirements for combustion that are produced by a flame like that are so much higher than what it takes to cause us injury that our perspective is personal. Our perspective is from our pain and injury, not from the requirements for combustion. So as it turns out, we are many, many times, more than 100 times more sensitive to pain and injury than what it takes to actually ignite this house. And that means we start paying a lot of attention to flames like this and not to things like firebrands. Firebrands that are extremely effective in igniting the structure from their accumulation and then slowly producing glowing combustion on the house that then produces flaming combustion if it sustains and eventually destroys the house, is out of our perspective. Our perspective is on what affects us, the big flames, the big heat that we feel that produces the pain that impresses us is not necessarily related to what it takes to ignite the structure.
Okay, one of the things on that video he shared, that big forest burning, 100-foot flames that was just 45 feet from the house, and the home made it. Remember that picture and that number, because we're going to come back to that here in a little bit, about that home surviving, even though you had huge trees burning just 45 feet from that home. So again, what makes fire burn? Oxygen, heat, and fuel. You know, when we do a lot of scaping, bee scaping, food scaping, we always think what those plants, what those critters need. We're going to try to look at what fire needs in what we call fuel. And fuel is what we have around our home. Our home is just a fuel for the fire. And it could be your mulch, it could be plants, it could be your gazebo. All that is just a fuel source from the perspective of fire. So when we now are talking about this fuel source, and this first, your structure plus your first 5 feet, we call that, remember, the bee ember wear zone. And we kind of start on the structure first. One of the things about embers, they can travel over a mile or more and ignite things on fire. What you see here on the picture on the right is from the Sleepy Hollow fire in Wenatchee. And you can see how many embers are being blown at this structure. And so this is a very violent ember shower we have here. And on the left is a cedar shake roof starting on fire from a single ember. And so one of the things as you look around your home is making sure your roof doesn't have things that can ignite from ember. That's removing the leaves, cleaning your gutters, removing the pine needles. I hope anyone doesn't have a cedar shake roof. We don't have much left anymore. A lot of them have burned up, actually. I've seen a lot burned up over my career. We can often pick them out on fires of which homes had cedar shake when I first started my career. So a lot of them be placed. So what we're looking for around a home is how embers can ignite something on a structure or get into our structure. One of the things we tell people is vents. This is one way embers can get into your house. You have a nice gable vent on the left there. A greenhouse has no vents. Has big vents, and think of that. Embers can easily get in that greenhouse, ignite things on fire. And in August, what's in your greenhouse? Not usually green plants, usually storage, because all our plants are out in the yard. So
Hey
what we
Guy,
recommend, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. You have a blue box over your screen. Is it possible maybe something is over your slides, or maybe try stopping sharing and start it up again?
Is that better?
Yes, that is better. Thank you.
That was the video of you guys.
Yeah, we're having a hard time hearing too. Mine is you're kind of muffled.
Okay, is that better? Let's go through this slide. If not changed, I'll change microphones. So we'll see if the louder speaking helps. If not, I'll change to my camera microphone. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. So here we're talking about screening the vents so embers can't get in the home. And a lot of vents are screened, but not all the vents, like in that greenhouse. How's the sound now? Okay. Screening. So as we look at our home, a couple things is the siding. Ideally, you have a non-combustible siding. This is hardy plank, fiber cement siding. The other thing is you want that siding at least 6 inches from the ground. This picture doesn't show it, but there's actually 6 inches from that bottom of the siding to those leaves. And you don't want leaves. We'll get that here in a second. But we really want that gap between your siding your house and where those flames are next to your house. As we look around our home, we're looking for anything that can start on fire from the embers. And that's include our deck. You know, what kind of furniture do you have? Is it ignitable? Ideally, you have metal out there, which I have around my house. I use aluminum chairs. I love them because they don't biodegrade from sunlight. They stay out in the winter. So looking at that landscape, what's out there, and someone said, well, what do you mean? I need to get rid of all my furniture? Think about this. One of the things we talk to people about in fire season is situational awareness of the weather. We pay attention to the weather now in the winter. If it's winter storm warnings, get our shovels out, get our vehicles ready. If we have a red flag warning in the summer, which was we experienced in the Gray and Oregon fires, we know it's going to be a very hot day with extreme chance of extreme wildfire. So maybe that day I take in my pillows, the cushions, and put them in my house for the day or for the afternoon to remove those potential ember, what we call tinder, or things that can start on fire from an ember. Of course, your garbage next to your home, recycling bins can all be things starting from an ember shower. One of the things about our gardening techniques is from a fire perspective, it looks at all these plants as fuel. And one of the things, the first thing an ember looks for is how much moisture is that fuel. Is it high moisture or low moisture? High moisture, like these plants, embers have a hard time starting things on fire. If you also think about a fuel source like these plants, what matters to fire is the size of it. Is it small fuel or light fuels or heavy fuels like a log? The smaller, the lighter the fuel is, the easier embers can light on it. The other thing that determines how big flames we get next to our house is the fuel loading, or the biomass. How much material of plants do I have out there? And what we call the continuity. This is a beautiful horizontal continuity flower bed. From a fire standpoint, that's just a constant fuel source. So from a gardener, great. From a fire, it's not a good thing if you're trying to reduce the impact of fire around your home. And the other thing is is in our gardens, we also like vertical arrangement. But fire can climb those things, get to your home. And we'll talk about some techniques here about how to mitigate that. One of the things about fuel that we often look at, I like to go back to camping when we're starting a campfire. And we kind of need three types of these fuels to get a campfire going. We need what we call that tinder, something that starts from a single match. It starts kindling on fire and it starts to fuel wood. In this case, the fuel wood is your home. So fire escape. What we want is an ignition resistant home / landscape. Nothing in that first 5 feet that can start on fire from a single match or a single ember. And so we're going to talk about that more about that landscaping principles in that first 5 feet. A couple things is we're going to talk about fire resistant plants. We also want plants, ideally you have none, 0 plant material here. If you have to, just have minimal plants, make sure they're fire resistant. They have a high fuel moisture in the summer. And if you're going to plant in there, have a patchy landscape, not that nice flower bed of fuel. Maybe it's a couple key plants here and there. The key thing, we want no tinder because that campfire. We're also going to go talk about the zone 2, which is lean, clean, green, that goes out to 30 feet. I bring that 30 feet out. People think that's not a lot of distance. But remember that big flames of trees burning 45 feet from the home and the home made it? The research says you get a good bang for your buck with 30 feet between you and the woods. More is better, but 30 feet is a good bang for your buck. So zone 1, we kind of share this picture of your home, making sure it's the ember shower. The key thing with plants, no such thing that plant won't burn, but some plants are more fire resistant than others. So I got a question for you. Are native plants always the safest choice for fire escaping? Yes or no? The correct answer is no. Some native plants explode in a fire. So that's one thing to be aware of. Not all plants are good for fire escaping. We do have a nice Eastern Washington book that talks about plants, which ones are good choices. This also lists water needs, butterfly friendly, deer unfriendly, so you can meet your other objectives around your home when you're trying to plant. So I'm an ember. I'm going to land around your home. What do I like in a plant? So we're going to see what fire likes. Okay. Here's the characteristics of plants that burn hot, that embers like, and that can do damage to home. They love plants that accumulate a lot of dead vegetation. They have dense branching pattern, waxy leaves. They got a lot of leaves and branches of biomass, and they got a low moisture content. Typically, they're fast growing. One of the perfect plants for this, we call them little gas cans as firefighters, are the arborites. Okay, they burn hot. You don't want any of these within 5 feet of your home at all. This home made it with a lot of damage and some firefighter effort, but you can see what tall arborites did when they burned. So the flip side of what plants burn hot, let's talk about the qualities we want in plants. We want plants just the opposite of what fire likes. We want plants that don't accumulate a lot of dead vegetation, have open, loose branching pattern. They don't have resinous or oily leaves or needles. They don't have a lot of vegetation or fuel to burn. A high moisture content, slow growing. You won't find always a plant with everything, but as many of these qualities as you can. And believe it or not, most flowers and garden plants meet these criteria. So, firefighter view of plants. First, plants are fuel. We kind of look at plants as how ignitable they are. How easy will they ignite? How big flames they'll give me? And the other thing is how long will they burn? The sustainability of that plant burning. And these are a couple examples of great plants in the different zones you can use them in. Lily is a great one in any area around your home. If you're in a beer making, hops is a pretty good choice. The lilacs we don't want to see next to your home because it gets a lot of biomass. but the lilac could be in that zone 2, that lean, clean, and green zone. Okay, I'm going to come back to a plant that I hate as a firefighter. The little gas can. Could you have this in that zone 2? Yes. Ideally, no. They burn hot. So one thing, as we continue to talk about landscaping zone 1, as we go home, is that the ember aware zone about your mulch. What kind of stuff do you have on the ground under your plants? We want mulch that doesn't burn. Sand, dirt, green grass that's maintained all summer long. Rock is a great one. Okay, so you're looking for that mulch that won't burn in that 5-foot zone. And in this zone, again, we want to keep minimal plants. If you have plants, have them small, like in this picture. Use patchy or island planting, where you space things out. And fire resistance. And also in that first 5 feet, we don't want any trees. And it's not just because of fire is one reason we want our trees, but think about the health of your home. Tree roots next to your home is not a good thing. You can have it outside of that, but no trunk of a tree within 5 feet of your structure. And that's for many, many reasons besides wildfire. A couple things. There's a lot of little things we need to be aware of. Beautiful plant here. I call these Mother Day planters. We often get them for our moms. If you're a mom, you probably received them, and they're very, very pretty. But oftentimes, these are the little things that can start a house on fire. What does this plant look like in August? Okay, and people said, "Oh, yeah, that will burn." One of the things, it's not just the plant there. What's in that pot? It's actually not soil. It's actually peat moss. Okay, and I knew someone who lost their home, not from a wildfire, but from a spark, when he would put his stogie out in one of these planters. And the planter started on fire, started the deck on fire. The deck carried flames to the home, and he burnt his home down. And he realized that when the firefighters told him where the fire started, that he burnt his home down. So as we look in this 5-foot zone, what other flammable material are there in this zone that steps you can take? The recycling bins, the garbage bins, you're looking at your furniture types, and it could be some of the tools we use around home, like a broom. Okay, the nice thing about some of these items, how easy it is to move if we need to move them. Moving the broom inside. There's a lot of things we can do to make our ember-free zone around your home. So a question here to think about, looking at right next to the home, could this start your house on fire? Maybe. The other thing is how easy it is to change this area. Okay, it may not be pretty at first, but you could remove those dry grasses very quickly and have dirt. And that's the first step on this process. This is an example of beauty bark or burnable mulch burning next to the home. Luckily, they did not lose the home, but we had a lot of ignitability potential in that beauty bark from an ember. Luckily, the plant was still green and it didn't ignite it. We had some other concerns. These are gas pipes for the propane tanks, and they can more ignite easier than propane tanks. Luckily, they did also have a nice distance from the mulch to the bottom of that siding in the house at over 8 inches. Nice thing is, let's go look to the left of the house where that air conditioning unit is. The mulch change are good, but look at how close the siding is to the ground. Okay, if they had mulch up there, the chance of the home igniting would have been very, very high because those flames would have been touching that siding in the house. I have another short video I'm going to share with you from the Insurance Business Research Institute about these embers around structures.
So from start to finish, We're going to start with our ember generators, which we use to recreate a realistic ember exposure. Embers are those small burning and smoldering particles that may travel ahead of the fire front. And what we do with our generators is we create the realistic exposure, and in our wind tunnel, we're able to throw them at a building. And then we have a building that has two sides to it, a good side which uses wildfire resistant construction, and what we're considering a typical building that we would see in a wildfire prone area. Exactly as we expected, that mulch on the ground there caught fire from the embers. The fire from the mulch burned up under this deck, and this whole deck was on fire. And so this fire on this deck caused flames right against the home. And then if we look there at the base of the door, there was actually the flames from this deck that burned through the bottom of the door, and on the inside of the house we started to see smoke and flames. And so because this deck was a combustible material attached to the building, when the embers led to the ignition of this deck, we got flames inside of the building. Here we are on the wildfire resistant side of the house, where we had non-combustible siding, a 5-foot non-combustible zone and 6-inch gap. We had a metal gutter and multi-pane windows, and we see in comparison to the non-wildfire resistant side, this side had the same ember exposure. If you look here in the mulch, you can actually see some of the embers that had accumulated, but because they had no susceptible fuel to ignite, they just landed there and fizzled out. Now here we have ornamental vegetation that again is susceptible to the embers, but because it's more than 5 feet away from the home, it didn't have enough energy to ignite, and it never led to a flame impact on the building.
So one of the things about that place igniting, think of the campfire. You have tinder, which is the mulch, the kindling was the deck, and the home was the house log, the fire log. So they had that tinder kindling log. So a single match started things on fire. So that's zone 1. That's the bulk of what we're talking about, because we're going to go to zone 2. Key thing with zone 2, we get more flexibility. We want the same principles in zone 1. We'll get more flexibility. And that 30-foot zone does a lot. Remember that 45-foot flaming front? 30 feet can protect your home from that radiant heat. Okay. And the key thing in here, I tell people, look at the island concept. You want your fuels broken up. I kind of like this bottom picture because it has a little burnable mulch in here, but it's nicely separated from near the home, has nice hardscaping around it. So if it does burn, you're isolating those flames, that intensity, and keeping it far enough from the home so it won't ignite the home. A lot of our typical yard and garden techniques we have work in zone 2. The key thing, like with mulch, is still be considerate of that tinder out there of what it will ignite. You know, with mulch, if you want to use beauty bark, I'm doing islands, maybe not the whole backyard, but just certain areas, and mix it with rock and use large pieces of mulch. They are harder to ignite than that fine mulch there in the center. So think of that. Plants, we can incorporate plants in zone 2. You can have some of those larger plants with more biomass. Again, that patchy island concept. This is a nice, very nice zone 2 patchiness of islands and hardscaping. Of course, fire-resistant plants are the best. Trees are not a bad choice. They're good choices in this zone. Deciduous or leaf-based trees are the best. The needle/evergreens have oily, waxy layers and burn much hotter. And hardscaping is always good. I kind of like this picture because it had a mosaic of features in that zone 2. And it's actually not bad. A couple things is it has islands. This rock wall acts as a fuel break. Okay, it can stop that fire from going. You got some hardscaping down here that's breaking up that fuel continuity. We have a lot of patchy fuels of different size. Yeah, they got a little dead material here, but again, some patchiness. Okay, so those are some of the techniques you use. And another did you know question here is I asked, that flaming front of fire can ignite furnishing inside your home. The answer is true. It can ignite things in your home. That's why we want that 30 feet. It helps reduce the impact of things igniting your home. I was on a fire once. I visited a landlord after the fire, and he only had about 20 feet of this zone. He's still working on the others, and he had scorch marks on his carpet from the heat coming through the windows. Luckily, it wasn't enough to get it ignited, but he did have some damage. But he came out it pretty good. Key thing, if you got plants in zone 2, this lean, clean, green, the right plant is in the right place in the right condition. This is an example of, from a fire standpoint, and not a good plant, good condition, but it's definitely in the wrong place. You got to be careful where you put the plants. Think how big they'll grow, and what they'll grow into. Here's some examples of they could have been the right plants. Let's say they are. They could have been in the right place, but currently they're in the wrong condition. They weren't maintained. They're fuel sources. I call this the perfect right plant, right place, right condition. Nice, good plants, good choices, low growing. The lilac's not the best choice, but they're maintaining it very well. So they're trying to keep it a condition. This is a great one I like. I really like that rock next to the home. I think it looks aesthetically pleasing. The hostas there and those other patchy plants there. I personally really like this look. So it can be very aesthetically pleasing. The other thing is zone 2. We try to look at for wicks. What can take fire from the woods to the house? In this scenario, it's a fence. Okay, you see the woods in the back, ignites the fence on fire, and carries fire to the house and burns the house down. So we need to break that wick, and how do we break that wick? We need to get rid of a chunk of that wood. The best answer, take out that chunk and replace it with metal. Okay. The next choice would be actually just remove the gate here and put a metal gate in. And that would break the wick. So think about that and some of the other things that might carry fire to your home. So the key concept when we look at landscaping, creating a defendable space around your home, those zone 1 and zone 2, is what's that tinder? What can an ember ignite? If that tinder gets going, what's that kindling it can ignite to make bigger flames? And what can that kindling start? The fuel wood, my house, or bigger things that give big flames. So we're thinking of that concept of reducing those fuel types, especially that tinder in zone 1, that kindling in zone 1, and reduce as much as you can in zone 2. So to wrap this up, a summary: as you create this defendable space, have a purposeful plan. You want a mixture of plants that are fire resistant and hardscape. In that zone 1, you want nothing that will ignite from a single match. No tinder. Zone 2, that lean, clean, and green, we have a lot more options in there. Use that island concept of clumping of material, clumping of vegetation, maybe even burnable mulch with areas of hardscaping. The end. Questions, comments?